It's a deceptively simple question. Is there a place for God in education? I know it's going to trigger many more questions and perhaps some answers. We know who Professor Trevor Cooling is. Had he not written this report, Doing God in Education, this debate perhaps wouldn't be happening in the form it is.
The reason I wrote the report is because I've come to the conclusion that how people handle their deeply held differences of religious belief and non-religious belief is one of the factors that's going to shape the future of our world. Now, in the UK, there is actually much that people seem to agree upon. Most people think that education should seek to be fair in the way the different communities and belief systems are handled. The importance of respecting pupils' rights to make up their own mind is widely acknowledged. And most people want an inclusive approach which enables children from all backgrounds to be comfortable in the education they experience. However, the report suggests that this consensus masks a fundamental fault line, and it has to do with how we think about the place of religious beliefs in knowledge. What I propose is that most of the influential campaigning for what is sometimes called inclusive education is based on the supposition of the irrelevance of religion. I argue for a view of knowledge where people's beliefs are treated as integral to their understanding of the world. And the implication of what I argue is that education inevitably draws on people's worldviews and their beliefs because it inevitably sets forth a vision of what it means to be human. I want to ask why people don't campaign for good faith schools where theology contributes to the public good, rather than campaigning for the abolition of faith schools and their removal from the public system of education.
Since Trevor Cooling didn't actually answer the question but gave us many more questions, would you like to address his final one? Why the humanists don't promote high-quality education that draws on the resources of faith in the service of the wider community within faith schools?
I think that the argument from objectivity is not an argument that we have made or would make in relation to most educational issues. The arguments that are made about fairness and about distinctiveness and about worldviews certainly can apply to things like the curriculum. It's legitimate to talk about fairness and distinctiveness and the place of worldviews in relation to the curriculum, but one of the problems with the report is that it tries to stretch these arguments too far. One of the things that the BHA has always said is that what it's in favour of is for all schools to teach about a diverse range of religious and non-religious beliefs, to allow young people to understand that people hold these beliefs now and to assist in mutual understanding, to understand better the human heritage of the last 6,000 years at least, which is very much tied up with those religious and philosophical beliefs, and also to be able to refine and test their own emerging beliefs against those different philosophies and worldviews. Now, if faith schools were to do that, let me say, then I think that would be a great improvement.
Joyce, how would you respond to what Trevor said?
I think I would like to preempt my comments by saying, first of all, that I've always worked within community state schools. I have no experience of faith schools, and I remain a bit agnostic about my own position on faith schools. I am convinced that education is not value-free. It's impossible to have neutral education. Everything about schools, from the way they're organised, the curriculum, how they relate to parents, everything is based on values. What I would like to see is a much deeper engagement with those questions by all teachers in all schools, and at the moment that seems a bit of a luxury, whereas I think it is absolutely essential if schools are going to work out what they are, what their ethos really is, and the role of all religions and none and all belief systems are going to play in the working of individual schools and how they operate. So wherever people come from is, in a sense, for me, almost irrelevant, as long as all of those voices can be heard and shared to the improvement of that school and its ethos, whether it's a faith school or a community school.
Coming to the point about faith schools, what we have to recognize, and that's important that we do, that our society is made up of not only many different religions or people of no faith, but also within those religious communities there are people of different, who hold faith at different levels. Faith adherence is different. So some people would feel quite comfortable to send their kids in state schools where perhaps there's Christian worship or non-Christian worship and a bit of religious education, and they'll be quite happy with that. But there are devout Christians and devout Muslims and devout who would like much more for their children, because that's what they believe, it's their deeply held beliefs, and they feel it's more appropriate for them to be able to go to a faith school that actually teaches the values and the beliefs of that particular religion. And there are issues of fairness, but it doesn't mean that we shut the schools down. It means we sit down and look at where are the issues which are to do with fairness for those families who come from, if you like, a very devout end of the religious spectrum. Often in the Muslim community, they'll be isolated, marginalized. So faith schools will be a stepping stone to actually bring them into mainstream. And that's the thing that sometimes is lost when in these big debates. Rather than take a dispassionate approach on beliefs and values when an RE teacher goes into a school, Trevor's advocating, as I understand, a courageous restraint. For example, a Christian teacher, a committed Christian teacher, goes into a school with young people of different religions. Inevitably, he or the teacher will come across people who will say something against Christianity. Instead of responding back in a negative way, I think the courageous restraint would be a great asset to show that, yes, give them the space to talk and let's understand each other's points. And I think that will be key to community cohesion.
The only way to allow people to be who they are in public, and education has much to do with the development of an identity, is to allow a diversity of provision, because we live in a diverse situation. I think it also raises the issue of who are the real stakeholders in education and whose responsibility is it. I know that often the argument is placed that we should not have faith schools, for example, funded on the state, but they're not funded on the state. They're funded by the people. The state's role is to see a just and fair and equitable distribution of resources among communities who are in their very nature diverse. I, as a Christian believer, pay my taxes as much as a non-believer does. And I think both Trevor and Andrew are right that every school ought to teach about religion, because it is such a worldwide phenomenon that can't be ignored. And the question that I would want to put really to us all is this: what are we looking for in terms of the management of this public square? Are we looking for acquiescence to a dominant secular ideology, or are we looking for tolerance in the original sense of that word, which allows me to say, I think you have a perfect right to your views and to educate your children in your particular viewpoint, but I think that I have that right too, and we have to admit that we disagree.
You say in your report, teacher training programs should introduce trainee teachers to the knowledge, skills and understanding required to deal with belief and diversity. And I read that and I thought, well, don't they? Don't they do that?
I don't think so, no. Across the country, what we should be doing is not saying to children, that's irrelevant, those religious bits are irrelevant. You can talk about that in the mosque or the church, whatever. We should be saying to them, it's really important you think about the beliefs that shape the values that you hold. And if we don't do that, what ends up happening in schools is that they simply reflect the values of the wider community, the media, the press, or their peer groups. And we don't actually get round, therefore, to challenging them.
I do think that Trevor goes too far in the importance that he attaches to worldviews, and in the very schematic account that he gives of these things, as if they are clear with particular boundaries, and everybody has one, and you can lay them out and you can see exactly what they are. Firstly, I don't think that's a very accurate description, in fact, of what most people's worldviews are. They are flexible, they are changing, they are porous, they are not rigid. They can't be accounted for in that same direct way. There are 2 points in this report where it is asserted with particular case studies that worldviews are of overwhelming significance in education, or ought to be. In relation to science and creationism, which are two separate things, there is a point in the book but in the report where it's pointed out that for a science teacher who is a Christian, a science teacher who is, for example, a humanist, the gloss they put upon their science, or the conclusions that they find that their science reinforces, are different, are divergent to some extent. Maybe. But the fact remains that the science they're teaching in schools is the same.
If you reduce it to a set of, as it were, disembodied facts or skills, then you are not engaging in what, for me, is the widest objective of education, which is meaning-making. And as soon as you get into meaning-making and making sense of the world in which we live, then that takes you immediately into the history of ideas, philosophical and religious frameworks. You can't do it without, unless we actually equip our young people to understand that. That's why they leave school with the sense of hopelessness and the fact that there is no meaning in this world.
There's two things. We either take a very utilitarian approach, in which case we educate young people so that they become economic units to serve the needs of the society, whether it's economic, social, or political, or we help to develop that young child, to fulfill their aspirations into finding out, deep questions. Who am I? What am I? What is my ultimate destiny? Those who ignore that God does exist and take the opportunity to develop that understanding of God should not really force their views on those who have chosen to find out God, to grow to understand Him, and to love Him. So there are different ways that we should look at education, but it would be wrong to impose one particular philosophy over the other. The diversity in our education should remain, giving young people the opportunities to find out for themselves about the existence of God.
I'm not so sure about Andrew's comment about science being as neutral as he would like it to be, but there is a Buddhist concept that I find really helpful as an educationist, and it's the word chitta, which translates as somewhere between mind and heart. So bringing together those two aspects of human being. So you don't separate rationality from emotion, because they are inextricably bound up together. And as an educator, I really like that idea. It's a whole child idea. Education is never just a matter of cognitive development. It always impacts on the whole person.
Trevor, Anne was worried about what she's described as the dominant secular ideology, and in your report, you're very keen to stress that secularism is not a value-neutral force in education. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, I think I want to agree with Andrew when he talks about worldviews, because if I characterise worldviews as very fixed things, I didn't mean to do that, because I don't believe they are. What I do think is that everybody is influenced by beliefs which form a sort of often pervasive worldview, but it may not be very clearly defined for them. We live in an environment where beliefs which are shaped by a secular view of the world implicitly influence a lot of our thinking. And I think one of those very strong influences is the idea that actually religion is a private thing which is fine for you on your own, but it shouldn't be something which you allow to influence your work in the public world. I think that there is a resource in our community called faith communities and non-faith communities, which should be drawn on in the public good. Let's encourage people of faith to think about how education can contribute to the wider benefit of the community, rather than just say to them, we don't want to hear about that.